G'day everybody, I'm James Orr, and today we've got Paul Murray from Law Wyze, our LPD. We're going to try and unpack some key issues around GRC, and specifically talking around issues around risk, resilience, and reputation in your business. Paul, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me along, James.
No, it's great. So this is going to be a first kick-off of doing these unpack sessions where we try and help you better discover what GRC is and some of the practical approaches that you can take. And we'll be touching on areas like Cyber GRC specifically, but we're also going to be talking about risk generally. So I kind of wanted to kick off with that. When we think about GRC today, what does that really mean for a business?
I think the key thing, James, is to think of it as just being an integral part of the organization's approach to risk, in the same way that most people these days take, for example, work health and safety risks. Rather than thinking of it as something highly technical that really only the IT side of things can deal with. It's something that the board members in particular, they don't have to learn the technicalities of it, but they do have to incorporate it into their general approach to risk and the way that they assign roles and responsibilities, for example, for other forms of risks. It should be dealt with in exactly the same way, I'd say.
Yeah, okay. So when we think about, potential aspects of resilience in an organisation, how does a GRC program go to work to help an organisation become more resilient?
Well, you might think that everybody really needs to be 100% watertight all the time, and of course that's an unviable goal. There are, like any other business risk, there are all kinds of things that you have to balance against the way that you deal with the risk. But one good place to start, at least, is, say, with data management. Data, as they quite often say these days, is the new oil.
Yep.
It's worth a lot to a lot of people, and it's also very easy to get your hands on, to copy, to share with other people, to sell to other people, to encrypt, so that you effectively take ownership or control over it. In the same way that any other asset in the business would be something that you would expect board members to be comfortable that they understand the risk management of. Data should be exactly the same. You should know what kind of data your organization collects, what it does with it, how it stores it, just the big picture view, how safe it is, what would happen in the unfortunate event that somebody else was able to, say, encrypt it, or to exfiltrate it, that is to copy it over to an external system. You might find that not only do people try and shake you down for a ransom to decrypt your data, but sometimes, as an alternative, or worse, over and above that, having received a payment, for example, to decrypt the data, they can then turn around and say, well, we've actually got copies of this data too. For an extra fee, we'll happily destroy it.
Sure.
How would you deal with that? What would the effect on your reputation be of some of that data being leaked?
Yeah.
What would the effect on your business be if that information were to be made public, or maybe just sold to people who are prepared to pay for it? But one thing that you're risking is that it can be shared with the world at large.
Yeah.
What effect would that have on your business?
Yeah. And you may not get a choice, right? When you think about mechanisms that exist today, like notifiable data breach scheme. You've got to be able to communicate effectively when a breach has occurred, and how prepared are you as an organisation to deal with those circumstances, which is, part of reputation, but also resilience as an organisation.
Yeah, I mean, you find yourself in a situation where the actual loss of the data, or the temporary loss of the data, didn't do such bad damage to your reputation, but you then made a mess of the management and communication of it.
How you go about resolving and responding.
Exactly. So people could look at the way that you dealt with it and thought, well, hang on, turns out my data was safe after all, but they were prepared to throw me under a bus to save themselves, or they were prepared to let my data be shared with the world at large, and it was just luck that got them through it.
Or they didn't have the rigor in place for a third party, or someone who's a part of their digital supply chain. And we've seen that play out quite a lot at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't, as a director, delegate certain duties, as we all know. And as an organization, you can't delegate some of those responsibilities either. You can't just say, well, look, we've got somebody dealing with this. We don't have to worry about it. We've passed the risk on to them. certainly you could be forgiven for thinking that, because a lot of people that you contract with will try and do that and pass the risk on to you.
Yeah.
But once you're in that supply chain, you've got no real reassurance that you know where that risk is
And
going to
it
fall.
becomes two-folded, right? Because you may have obligations which you can't delegate, but also there's trust that's been put into your business by customers, suppliers, or potentially your customer's customer that you may be holding, and that can do irreparable harm to your reputation and erode trust in your business. So a GRC program that's sort of fit for purpose and the right sized for your organisation. But what are some of the practical approaches that businesses can take to establish that framework?
Well, policies and procedures are one way of approaching it, and a key tool in dealing with that. Things like the board leading by example as well, another way of doing it. But you really want to take the steps that you would take in any other area to incorporate this approach into your business culture and make sure that it's ingrained in the culture. It's not just a question of being able to tick a box and say, okay, we've done that, let's forget about it.
Yeah.
It's something that you really have to incorporate into the way that you do business.
And so I guess, policies, they in themselves often have a reputation of being static, or insular items that sit out there in the ether. But how can an organisation take a policy and the process of creating that policy and all the effort and insight and diligence that's been put into assembling it, how do they put that into action, and what are the sort of things that they should be considering?
I think that's something that all organizations should be asking themselves with any policy that they create, because it's something that you do see frustratingly often, where organizations think that once they've generated a policy, they can then just tick a box and throw it in a drawer somewhere. You do really have to ask yourself in the way that you devise that policy, how you're going to be implementing it. And a great example of that's privacy policies. If you've got the Privacy Act, that mandates what must be in a privacy policy. The idea there is it forces at least one person in an organization at least once to ask themselves all those questions about their data, what they collect, how they collect it, how they protect it, what they do with it. But really, it's not enough just to think about that once. You have to make sure that your approach to managing that data incorporates that policy at every step. Anybody who's dealing with
is that where a policy then is basically put into action through process, and that's how systems drive what a policy sets out?
Yeah, I guess, but I've also seen people take the same approach to procedures as well. And we've got a work health and safety policy that's a broad overarching description of how we approach things.
Yep.
And then we have procedures. Well, we've got a procedure for operating forklifts. Now, the type of forklifts that we're operating have changed radically. The engines are much more powerful. They're much taller masts.
Yep.
Nobody's gone back and revised the procedures. So it's not necessarily just having another document. It's about adopting an attitude and an approach. And I think management at all levels and board level can play a very big role in championing that approach as well, and demonstrating it themselves.
So this is where a governance framework is really around establishing the beachhead and establishing that framework, but then it's the continuous improvement and revision. Absolutely. That's where the rubber hits the road.
Absolutely, you've got to bring it to life. It can't just be another document.
Yeah.
So you can't say, oh, we got policy. Oh, well, that's just going to sit in a drawer. Okay, we've got a procedure. Well, that could sit in a drawer too. Okay, we've got a governance framework. Well, unfortunately, that could sit in a drawer. That you got to draw a line under the documents at some stage, and start seeing it as a cultural shift that you've got to make.
And to benefit from it, it's about demonstrating these things in action and having these champions, but also stakeholders and owners who take responsibility.
Yeah.
And how can an organisation, identify who best is placed to, take these policies forward, or any other actions that might fall out of, establishing that framework?
I think that's actually up to the leaders within the organisation to decide. If they decide that they're going to make this a key part of their organisation's culture, then they will incorporate it at every level, whether it's from recruitment and selection, right the way through to daily operational decisions.
Yep.
You don't see cybersecurity or cyber GRC as an add-on to your everyday business. You see it as a kind of flavour to your
Yeah.
business, if you like.
What part of the value proposition even?
Well, that's one of the benefits of it as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. If you do manage to succeed in incorporating it into your culture, then you create an organization that people will just recognize as being a quality step above
Yeah.
others that don't.
But it is a big signal of quality, isn't it? You know, a business that's, you know, not just identified or established a GRC framework, it is a big signal to potential, you know, vendors, suppliers, or customers that they're a quality organisation, or an organisation seeking quality.
Yeah, and I think there have been a few recent examples where people have been badly or appear to have been badly let down by their supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to not only take the appropriate steps to make sure that anyone downstream in your supply chain is as reliable as you would hope that they are,
Mm-hmm.
but also to see where you sit in other people's, your customers' supply chains, and be confident that you can reassure them that you are rock solid and that they can rely on you in the
Yeah.
ways that they're having to.
And in the event of an incident, you know, while you can't necessarily unscramble the egg, it probably goes a long way to discussing the incident and the potential impacts of that incident with your customers, but being able to demonstrate then the reasonable steps and programs and functions that you had in place to try and protect that data. And, you know, despite those efforts, an incident still, you know, may happen, but
Yeah,
it certainly
yeah,
helps the conversation.
yeah. Sure. You should be very comfortably across what kind of data you have, what you use it for, why you're, all those things that I mentioned that need to go into a privacy policy.
Yeah.
At the very top levels of all organizations, you should be aware of the answers to those questions, and you should be able to demonstrate how you deal with it. You should know, for example, what the consequences would be should your particular forms of data get encrypted, or if they get copied over to an attacker's system, what the risks are that are associated with the loss of that data. If someone were to sell it, if someone were to encrypt it so that you couldn't get access to it, and you should be making the risk decisions that go along with that.
Yeah.
You don't need to know how to get access to a decryptor or how to buy Bitcoin or whatever,
Yeah.
but you do need to know what kinds of decisions will have to be made on the spot, and you'll have to assign people who have the responsibility for dealing with it.
And we might be talking, you know, about some specifics around cyber and data and technology, because, you know, that's part of our focus at Law Wyze. But these are things that are not technical issues. These are business
business
issues.
decisions to be made. As I said, it's got to be incorporated into your approach to risk.
Yeah.
You can't just write off a whole area of risk by saying that's too technical. You can draw the line under the level of technical knowledge that you feel that you need to have, and you can draw that wherever you think is appropriate. But you just have to be confident that you've dealt with the way that you can do that and still handle that decision making.
Yeah. And this would fall into other areas where you've got AI, generative AI being an example of that, coming into the fore. You know, we've spoken about data, and then obviously a byproduct of that being your digital supply chain and how they're backing you up, you know, your software providers, how they're backing you up. If we think maybe perhaps just on the element of AI, you know, how might that be, you know, starting to enter the conversation of GRC in a business?
Well, you don't have to be intimately familiar with what AI is, even let alone how it works. You do need to have a big picture view of how it works, though. In other words, you need to be aware of the risks that are associated with it.
Sure.
So, for example, one of the things that AI relies on is what they call training data. So that's you just sort of feed a lot of information into the AI system, and that allows it to come up with the amazingly human-like answers that it comes up with. But there are ways of any data that goes in there. There are ways of leveraging it back out in certain circumstances. So you've got to be aware that there is a risk that someone might quite innocently be feeding a lot of your key data into
Commercial and confidence information.
or there are all kinds of risky forms of information that could be getting fed in there. But again, that comes back to the big picture approach to knowing what data you have, what you use it for, what you do with it.
Yeah.
If you just ask those questions once to put it in a document to lock in a drawer, then that's not going to help you. However, if you take that approach to dealing with data all the time, as soon as someone explains to you what AI is and how it works, you'll think, okay, what are the consequences for the way that we handle our data.
So it gives you the tools then to be asking the right questions and putting things through the right level of critical analysis before you do it. And we've heard some examples, anecdotally in our dealings where organisations, for example, have been using publicly available generative AI solutions, which essentially then publish that data into the system and almost releasing control of that information in that process, which may have adverse effects that they hadn't fully considered up front. But because perhaps the critical analysis wasn't done up front, because the policies may not have existed, and AI is very much an emergent field, which is why we're quite focused on helping businesses navigate it. But it becomes the questions that you need to ask up front, because you don't want to be looking through the rearview mirror on these issues.
No.
Yeah, it's a big, interesting area. If you've enjoyed this conversation, we'd love to hear more from you. This is James and Paul from Law Wyze.